Hi, everyone. It's me, Tim. Today, I want to talk about Fallout cut content. This has been a very frequently asked question. Um, it's People seem very fascinated by what didn't make it into the game, and I'm going to try to answer the question, but I've got a big caveat here. When I left Interplay, it caused some consternation in the individuals above me, and I was warned multiple times that I wasn't allowed to take any Interplay property, off the site like I would have. So that meant I left all the code behind and I left all the design documents behind. That's fair. I mean, I was work for hire. They own that. It is a little ironic that a few years later they lost the source code and called me to see if I had it. And I was like, is this a trap? Anyway, um, so I don't have any of that stuff. However, what I do have is ever since I was in grad school, I had learned to take notes because you think you're going to remember something and you are not going to remember it. So something I learned to do was I would write down, like if I'm in a meeting and somebody says something, I might write it down. If I'm working and I remember something else I need to do, I'd write it down, knowing that the next morning I can look at those notes and go, oh yeah, today I've got to work on this thing. Many of those notes were dated, but because they were in a notebook, even the ones that weren't dated, I have a pretty good idea of when I wrote them because if page 2 has a date and page 4 has a date, then I know page 3 happened between those two dates. Because of this, I put together a timeline for Fallout with some very exacting dates on it. Like I can tell you the exact date that we decided to do voice over for some of our characters. I can tell you the exact dates people started on the project because in our team meetings, I would go, "Oh, so and so is starting next week." So I went through those notes, and there isn't a whole lot on cut content. And I did ask Leonard a few questions about cut content as well to try to make sure my memory was right. So I'm doing this mostly by memory. The interesting thing about that too is what do I mean by cut content? Because everyone just says cut content. I'm going to talk about things that were designed but never put in the game because they were deemed like that's not quite a good fit, or they were designed and work started, and either the work wasn't finished, or that area was buggy, or for whatever reason it just didn't end up. So I've got mostly stuff from Fallout, and then one thing from Fallout 2, just because I did it and it was cut. Let's start talking about Fallout cut content. So one of the first things I remember is when a design came across my desk for a Terminator style robot, sleek, metal, looks like an endoskeleton robot. It didn't make it past that design phase. I remember having to tell the designer, you know all of our touchstones. You know Robbie the robot from Forbidden Planet is one of our touchstones. We've already got Mr. Handy and several other robots done. This is not right. And I remember having to explain, this is a good idea, but not a good idea for this game. By the way, I've said this before, that is one of the hardest skills to learn, which is editing your ideas, knowing that something's a good idea, but not necessarily a good idea for the game you're making. I messed up a lot on that. I was the one who put the ghosts in the den, and I agree with Chris Avallone years later who said, hey, Fallout has enough in it. You really don't need to add supernatural. And he's right. So those Terminator style robots got cut, which is why I was surprised to see synths in Fallout 4. I mean, and I'll be honest, they can do Fallout 4, Bethesda can do whatever they want, and it's canon when they do it. But I didn't like them. So, and I remember seeing them and going, wow, I cut something that looked a lot like this from the original Fallout. So it's funny to see it make its way back in. I know also another thing that people seem to know about are the talking raccoons. I know Scott Campbell has talked about this in some interviews he's done. He called them the Salanter or something. I remember them being called the Recree, but maybe this is memory getting layered on top. I just remember they were presented to me as talking raccoons. They were raccoons that had been exposed to FEV that got smart, that learned the language from the scientists studying them. This all happened before the war, probably down in the Glow or wherever the FEV was being developed at the time, because it got moved to the Glow right before the Glow got nuked. The Recree, there were two things I had problems with, and I basically put the kibosh on them. One, they were presented to me as little talking raccoons that lived in a hollow tree, and my mind went straight to Keebler elves, and I did not like it. That just caused this visceral ugh. But in general, I don't like talking animals in Fallout. I don't like talking death claws in Fallout. In fact, to go to an extreme, I don't like anything that makes death claws into anything other than frightening, killing death machines. Again, the fact that you're attacking a death claw at the very beginning of Fallout 4 just didn't sit right with me, because it took some of their fear factor away. If I'm level 2 or 3 and I'm attacking a death claw and I'm winning, I'm not going to be that scared of death claws. In Fallout 1, we had you hear about death claws. You were, they were saying they kill everybody. There's something out there, it's killing everybody. You go and you find some weird eggs and you're like, this is weird, what is this? And then you finally get attacked by a death claw and it's a tough fight. And then you find out that's a baby death claw. That's not even mama death claw. That's death claws to me. So talking death claws right out. And because of that, I kind of started saying, hey, could we get rid of all the ideas we have for talking animals? So those things got cut very early. One thing that didn't get cut and got designed, but never made it in, the LA area, especially I think the Boneyards, were supposed to have a lot of different themed gangs. I know the Vipers were one of the names. There were several others. They all had named leaders. They were supposed to be fighting over territory or caches of equipment or whatever. There was all these quests that were supposed to be done based on these gangs, and it was just never done. And so it wasn't really cut content. It was content that never got finished. And when those areas had to be completed, they just were completed in a different way. Interestingly, even, and I know like a lot of those appear later in Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas. There are references to those gangs. I think when you go to Shady Sands, there are several characters there that talk about those gangs. They even named them. So they were planned. They just never got done. Another thing we wanted to do was we were going to make the Interplay building in Irvine. So that would have been located somewhere between the Cathedral and the Glow. We were going to design the Interplay building where we're all working, and we were going to say that for some reason it had a generator that was still going, so the emergency systems were still running. So it had like point defense turrets on it. And the two funny things I remember was Brian Fargo owned a Dodge Viper, and that was still going to be in the parking lot. And it was going to still look usable, but any attempt to approach it, you would get totally destroyed by those turrets. And then the other thing was when the building went to emergency power, it diverted all the energy to things like those turrets. So we had these fobs, these electronic fobs that we had used to get in and out. That system was turned off. And so when you eventually had to break into the building, you would find there was going to be a skeleton up against one of the doors trying to get out, trying to still fob its fob on the reader. It was one of the producers, Bill Dugan. He was the Mac producer. It was going to be him. He was a character, and we wanted to put him in there. You could tell from his lanyard. So those are the two things I specifically remember. If we had put it in, we wanted to do a post-credits cutscene where it would show the building again. And there's a villager type. There's a guy who's hunched over and they're very tan. They walk like this. Internally in the data files, they were called the loser, village loser. We were going to do a cutscene that showed a loser walking through the parking lot, and as he walks by the Viper and looks at it, the turrets don't fire. So maybe something you did had disabled them. And he gets in the Viper and drives off just to show you, oh, you could have done that. That got cut for many reasons. We didn't have time, and also it's not aspirational. But that was something we were planning to do as a end credits cutscene. And then that was all the things I could find that were cut for some reason from Fallout. However, in Fallout 2, there was something I designed that I kind of missed wasn't there when Fallout 2 shipped, which was the Abbey of Lost Knowledge. This was, totally based off of Walter Miller's Canticle for Leibowitz. I know Brotherhood of Steel was based on them. This one was even more direct. There was going to be a monastery to the north of Vault City, and there were a bunch of monks there, and all they did was they had manuals and blueprints and technical specifications for technology that they would copy over and illustrate, and very, very Canticle. They were different from the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood found technology to hoard and keep away from people and preserve. These people were trying to preserve knowledge, and anybody was allowed into the Abbey. You were allowed to visit it. They welcomed you in. You could look at anything you wanted. They just said you can't take anything and you can't damage it. I had whole quest lines planned where you would go back to the Abbey to find some important piece of information to advance a quest, or the Brotherhood of Steel discovers the Abbey, and of course they want to confiscate everything. And the Abbey, the monks there are pacifists, but they don't want to give it up. But maybe they ask you to intervene or whatever. So we had quests designed for all of that stuff, and it just never got done. And I'm not sure why. But I don't know what else got cut later. I know Fallout 2 diverged from the original plan, so I'm probably not the person to ask about Fallout 2 cut content. The only thing that I think is a lesson to learn from this, which I've already said, which is I've learned over time that sometimes you just have to let go of content. It's not done. It's not ready. Either if you put it in, it's going to be buggy, or it's going to be half-baked. Or the hardest lesson, which is you had a great idea, and this happened to me. It's happened to every designer I've worked with. You have a great idea, but it is not great for this game. And that's a really hard thing to get people to see, which is why in later games I started putting design goals. And I'll do a video eventually on design documents. It's on my list. But I try to put goals at the top of them. It's a great idea I got from Josh Sawyer. And that way, if you're talking about a feature in the game, you can argue it one of two ways. You can argue, does it achieve the goal, or do you disagree with this goal? Those are very different discussions. And in terms of this, for example, with the Terminator robots, we'd already decided our robots were Robbie the Robot style. So the Terminator robots do not fit. You could argue whether or not they fit. I think you would lose that argument. You could try to argue whether or not our goal of making it Robbie the Robot was a good goal. But since it fit in with our 50s, aesthetic, I think that's a bad argument as well. So some cut content was taken out because it didn't fit. Some was taken out because it wasn't finished. Some was taken out because it was buggy. And rather than put it in, we're just like, we're not going to do it. And others were cut for reasons I have no idea. I could probably also talk about cut content from Temple at some point. I don't know if there's any cut content from Arcanum. When that game seems to be, if we had an idea, we stuffed it in there somewhere. And I'll have to talk to Leonard or Jason about cut content from Vampire, because I'm not 100% sure what got cut from that. But all that's on my list. I'll try to do that again at some point. But I hope you enjoyed Fallout cut content.